got a mighty big subject here. First thing I want to do though, and at the dedication up there, they talked about the Albert Schweitzer room that was the first. And I want to help you to understand that, and I told Albert Schweitzer's family this. I knew his daughter. I went to California and met her back in 2005. And Ann Schweitzer's granddaughter that still tours the world giving piano concerts on Mozart, even though Johann Sebastian Bach was Albert Schweitzer's favorite composer. And he played Bach music incredibly so on the organ. But I personally believe, and I told Schweitzer's daughter and granddaughter this, that I felt like that Einstein and relativity may have inspired Albert Schweitzer's new vision of modern ethics and the ethic of Jesus, and bringing it into the modern world with modern knowledge. If you say that the ethic of Jesus was saying we need to care for everybody, we need to have reverence for everybody, we need to love everybody, and I grew up in a Christian household, and that's sort of the way I view things. And if you look at Schweitzer and his academic excellence, he was as good an academician as you could ever find. I mean, there have been a lot of really bright and brilliant people in history and that had incredible academic excellence all along the way, but Schweitzer was right there at the top. And anyway, when you factor in he felt like that if you took all of the ethics of history and you put them together, that the ethic of Jesus would sit on like a diamond on the top of the pyramid, and everything else would come beneath. But in 1915, exactly 10 years after Einstein in E equals mc squared, from 1905, Schweitzer, and I'd love to tell the story, but we don't have time, had the idea that went through his brain, Furcht vor dem Leben, reverence for all life. And I think he could see, because of relativity, the relatedness of all life. Now, Einstein related it to all things, but he did, in his ethical way, all life. And that's in is encapsulated form in why I have such devotion to a man named Albert Schweitzer. And his moral genius, the literary genius of the greatest, probably the greatest American author, Mark Twain, and the genius in the world of understanding something that I grew up, and when I learned it in college, meant a lot to me. And that is the macrocosm versus the microcosm. We all can understand our own little world and the way we think, and it makes sense to us. But how is it that we're able to try and open our minds and understand the big picture? And does it get any bigger than the cosmos? I mean, Einstein to have, as a young person, and I don't know, he may have even, it may have been before his teenage years, he may have imagined at age 12 or 10 what it would be like to ride a beam of light. Whoa! And incidentally, what's the first thing you think of when you think of the countenance of Einstein? Am I not correct? Isn't that the first thing you think of? I did this. Drew this for the last couple of months just to do that. So it helped you think of Einstein. Okay? Little story. This man takes his son to get his driver's license, and he goes in, aces the written test, takes the driving test with the state trooper, gets his driver's license. They're motoring home. Son says, Dad, we need to make some arrangements here to so that I can know when I can use the car. And Dad says, well, there's some stipulations here, son. And he's, well, first of all, you've been getting C's in school, and that just doesn't cut it. I know you're capable of doing better. So you got to get a B average or better. Not only that, but you need to study the Bible more. And last but not least, you need to get a haircut. And so 6 weeks go by, and Dad gets an envelope in the mailbox that day, and it's from the school. And it's his son's report card. So he opens it up, and whoa, and he goes in, and he says, son, I expected you to turn that ship around, but you sure did it mighty fast. I'm impressed. This is real good. You got all B's and an A. And he said, and I couldn't help but notice that you've been studying the Bible every night, and but you still have not gotten a haircut. And his son says, well, Dad, you know, since you've had me studying the Bible more, I couldn't help but notice that Samson had long hair. Moses and Abraham, Isaac, they all had long hair. I think even Jesus had long hair. And Dad said, well now, son, did you also notice that everywhere they went, they walked? I hope Dr. Varghese doesn't mind me telling the story. But Dr. Varghese got a letter in the mail from the World's Physics Symposium in Zurich. And they were wanting this eminent professor of physics to give lectures, and they're asking physics professors all over the world to go within 500 miles of where they teach and give various lectures. And so he said, well now, Joe Bus is not going to let me use the USA jet. Those are too short hops. So he says, I need to get me a limousine, but I need a driver. And somebody said, well, call Ross. He's got a good driving record. And so he calls me up, and I said, well, since it's for the university, I guess I can. So first day, we light out, and we go to this university, and he gives the lecture 2 or 3 times that day at different lectures. And I drive him around, and this goes on, and I had a little chauffeur's jacket and a cap, played the role, and that sort of thing. Well, into the second week after Dr. Varghese giving the lecture, the same lecture over and over again, he said, Ross, you know, I've been giving this lecture, and you've heard it so many times over and over again, and I need a break here. Do you mind if I drive the car, and I'll put your cap and your jacket on, and you take my tie and put it on, and you give this lecture at the University of Tennessee? And I said, well, yeah, I think I can do that. So he gets in the driver's seat, and he drives me there, and I sit back there like I'm an important professor of physics. And so we get there, and they meet us at the car, and they shake my hand, and we've got our biggest lecture hall, and it's filled to capacity, standing room only. There's even some newspaper and TV stations there. Your reputation precedes you, Dr. Varghese. I said, well, okay. So I go in, and I give the lecture flawlessly, and standing ovation at the end. And then when everybody quiets down and sits back down, the student stands up. And he says, well, Professor Varghese, if you have an extant star on the far side of the sun, and you discount Newtonian equations on gravity, and you look at the Banal coefficient of the imagined hypotenuse of the projection of the light waves going around the sun and the bending of the light, what would be the given relativity only and not special relativity, what would be that angle and what would be the Banal coefficient? And so I was just standing up there, and I looked at him, looked down at the floor, looked at the walls, looked at the ceiling, and I said, well, now, I'll tell you what. I thought this was an up-and-coming new Ivy League university. But I want you to know that I think that is one of the simplest questions I've ever been asked. I'm just going to have my chauffeur in the back to answer that. Do you remember that? One last thing before I get deep into the subject here. I got a new student for the fall for Dr. Busta the other day. And he did reasonably well on his SATs, and he did reasonably well on the other achievement tests. And he wasn't the greatest student in the world, but he was very modern and up to date. And he wasn't quite the student that Dr. Busta thought he would want. But he did have some pictures, and I managed to get into Dr. Busta's office and get one of those pictures. And 50 years ago, this would have been a little risque, but not today. Does that look like a new student? I think that's funny, yeah. And if Einstein were here and understood our culture, he would have laughed as well. Getting on track now as much as possible. I consider evolution the history of change. And if you'll notice in the Einstein room up there, I said, could the E also mean eternity or everything? And actually, from my vantage point, the best E would be evolution. And, but I didn't want to put evolution up there because it turns off too many people. But hopefully, in the next 40-some minutes, or 30-something minutes, you will see that from my vantage point, that mass times the speed of light squared, you're talking about changing mass and changing the speed of light squared to pure, unadulterated energy. Now, first law of thermodynamics. If you look at particles, one of the things that Einstein helped us to understand, in other words, the subatomic structure, considering protons, neutrons, electrons, that sort of thing. The first law of thermodynamics says you cannot destroy matter or energy. You only change. Now, if you change and cannot destroy it, logic says, if we had somebody from the philosophy department here, if it cannot be destroyed, it could never have been created. It is eternal. Now, everything physical is made up of subatomic particles. And if it could never have been created, now we have a tendency to go back in time to the Big Bang. And if we go back to the Big Bang, and like I think it was in 1951, there was many of the physics professors of the world were called to Rome, and they had an audience with the Pope. And the Pope says, okay, right there you find God, and that is the beginning. And so on. Now,